Now, you don't need a big space in order to grow your own food. Many people believe that they need acres of land in order to grow their own food. I know that the idea of a small garden will mean different things to different people, but if you implement certain practices and certain techniques, you can actually grow sufficient food in a small garden. My name is Ruben Olale. In today's video, we will be looking at some practices and ideas, as well as techniques that small gardeners can use to get the most out of their gardens. Now, as a point of departure, I think it's important to have clarity and a clear idea as to what you want to achieve with your garden. Is your intent just to grow food that you find expensive in the shop? Or are you just growing to have fun? Are you doing it as a hobby? My intent with my garden is actually to move to a place where I don't need to purchase any vegetables from a store. My plan is to gradually get to a point that whatever I need, I will be able to grow in my space. So to date, for the past couple of months, I have not been buying cabbage. I don't need to buy spring onions yet, as well as leafy greens, because I have some sweet chard plants as well as kale plants growing in my garden. So I think it's important as a gardener to have a clear idea as what you want to achieve. What are your priorities? What are your goals? I think that is one of the fundamental things that you need to get clarity on. But with that being said, I think having a good soil is arguably the most important aspect that will determine how your garden will perform. Plants need good soil, and they don't only need the soil to be anchored, but they also need a soil to obtain nutrients. So as a small-scale gardener, it's important to ensure that you feed your soil. I'm hoping in the future to cover more in videos on the practices that I implement in my backyard to ensure that I feed my soil. So I think it's important to mention that in order to have a bountiful harvest and a big harvest, irrespective of the size of your garden, that having a good soil is critical, because good soil or a healthy soil will result into healthy plants and eventually will result into having a bountiful harvest. So in addition to what I've just mentioned, I think there are some techniques that small gardeners can also implement to ensure that they actually yield much more out of their small spaces. One of the first things that I would like to discuss is succession planting. Now, succession planting is an idea that where you actually can produce a series of crops out of a single plot, garden, or containers. The idea with succession planting is to ensure that you do not have any idle space in your garden. This means that you need to have a clear understanding as to how long will a specific plant remain in your garden and when you will be harvesting that. So the packets clearly give an indication as to how long a certain plant will require to actually stay within the ground. So after you have harvested the plant, that you immediately replace that plant either with a seed, or you have a seedling ready that you will be transplanting into the place of the plant that you have harvested. So succession planting is a technique that is important, I think, to ensure that you get most out of your small space. Another technique that is very important and that can add value to a small gardener is vertical gardening. That means you ensure that you scout your place and think creatively as to how you can use vertical space to maximize your produce. You can then look into planting crops like tomatoes and grow them upwards, or beans. Use your walls or any other aspect in your garden to actually get most out of your vertical space. So I think vertical gardening is a very important technique that can assist small-scale gardeners also to get much more out of their small space. Another technique that I love, and I think it's very simple, is actually planting and harvesting wisely. That means is you look at plants that can enable you to actually get multiple harvests. Plants like kale and sweet chard are very good examples of plants that you can plant once and gain multiple harvests out of that one plant. So looking at such crops can definitely increase your yield, because you can get multiple harvests out of one crop. And so I think it's a good idea to look into plants like kale, to look into plants like sweet chard and lettuce that can enable you to harvest them over a period of time versus harvesting the whole plant at just one harvest. And the last technique, which I think can also add value to your garden, I think, is to looking at season extension. That means is trying to get to a point where you can actually grow vegetables even beyond the growing season. So that means that to look into crops like winter cooler crops that can be planted during the cooler seasons. If you're just focusing on tomatoes and peppers, or plants that are not growing well in cooler seasons, then you will be limited only to grow during the warm or main season. But if you look into planting cooler crops, then it can actually help you to grow beyond the growing season. But there's also other things that you can use to actually grow even beyond the growing season. You can look at to maybe, if you have the space to do so, grow in cold frames. You can also grow vegetables maybe under row covers where you avoid excessive frost to actually damage your plants. And there are so many other techniques that can also be implemented. But I think growing beyond only summer or during the main season can actually help you as a gardener to get much more out of your garden. So those are the techniques I believe that can actually add much value to any small scale gardener. Now, in addition to that, I think containers can actually help you significantly to actually grow quite a bountiful harvest. So click on the screen and check out how I grow some of my items in containers, and also click on the screen if you want to see how I grow some items during the winter, where I do a winter garden tour and also some winter harvesting. Thanks for watching. Keep sowing and keep growing. Cheers.